Hi, I'm Bonnie Barker with BonnieBabeCrochet.com, and I'm really excited to share with you today how to crochet the Hialeah Honey Baby Blanket. This is one of my favorite baby blanket designs, and it incorporates the Celtic Weave and the braided cable. Okay, this pattern is available through the book Contemporary Celtic Crochet, which is available online, both at the Interweave store and on Amazon, as well as on my Etsy store. It's also available in some local retail such as Barnes & Noble and some craft stores such as Joann's. So you might want to check around so you can follow along with the pattern. Okay, for this design, you're going to need a DK weight yarn. And all that yarn information is included in the pattern, as well as a crochet hook. Just need one size that's going to accompany the yarn. Okay, I believe I used a size G using this particular yarn. If you want to use other types of yarn, you're welcome to do that. Just make sure you use the appropriate size hook. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, before we begin, I wanted to show you an up-close view of where we're headed. It's never a bad idea to check out the map before you jump in the car and start going somewhere, right? Okay, so we have our braided cables throughout this project. We have a small section of the Celtic Weave, and notice that it's divided by 2 stitches of the double crochet. Here we have the center part of the afghan, which is a larger section of the Celtic Weave, and again mirrored by 2 rows of the braided cable, a smaller section of Celtic Weave, and one more braided cable, again all separated with these 2 double crochet stitches. And then we have the final rounds. We'll be working this shell with a picot. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. For this project, I originally used, and this is what I'm going to be using today, Caron Simply Soft Light. Now this yarn is discontinued, and it may still be available in some places. It pops up every now and then, but you don't have to use just this. You can use any kind of a yarn that is either a 3, which is a DK weight, and this actually tends to be a rather light DK. So if you have a thicker number 2 weight, like a sport weight, this could always work as well. Now if you do that, your gauge is going to be slightly off. You can check your gauge using the pattern in the book, and it's in the book Contemporary Celtic Crochet. Okay, the pattern for this book begins on page 62 and goes to page 63. I'm not going to be real detailed about the information that I give on this because I do want to encourage you to follow along with the written pattern, which is a part of the book with the other 23 designs. Okay, I should have mentioned you will need approximately 900 to 990 yards for this project. I'm going to be using a size G or 6 or 4.00 millimeter crochet hook to start. If you decide to use larger, thicker yarn, make sure that you bump the size of that crochet hook up to match the yarn so that you can get some nice drape. Okay, so now we're going to begin by chaining 106 chains. Okay, and the way I usually like to do this is I like to do this in multiples of 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Like so, and that way if someone decides to talk to you from across the room, it doesn't totally throw your count off because you just stop on a multiple of 5. I'll go ahead and finish this and I'll get back. For the first row, I'm going to double crochet in the 4th chain from the hook, which is right there, and in each chain across. I'm just going to be working in the side of the chain. It's just my personal preference. If you want to work in the back bump of the chain, that's fine. I do think, however, that as we come around and we work the final perimeter round, just putting the hole or the hook in the hole that remains is much easier when you work in the side of the chain, but I will leave it up to you as to what your preference is. Okay, so I'm going to just finish working the double crochets all the way across. At the end of this row, you should have 104 double crochets, and that is including the turning chain. Okay, now we're going to turn and we're going to chain 3. This is the beginning of row 2. Now let me just state right now that these next 2 rows are the very most important in the entire design, because they're going to establish the repeat of what we're going to do for the duration of this project until we get to the perimeter round. So if you ever need to, you can always go back to these rows. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to double crochet in the second chain, not the first, but the second, I'm sorry, we're going to double crochet in the second double crochet. Okay, like that. And now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to work the braided cable over the next 6 stitches. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to skip the next 2 stitches. We're going to do a front post treble crochet, just like this. I'll do this a little more slowly for the next one. For those of you who have never done front post or back post, we don't work through the top loops of these stitches, but instead we give it a belt, right, by bringing the hook around the stitch like so. Now do be careful, we don't bring it up high. We're not giving it a neck scarf like up here, but we are giving it a belt like this. Okay, so I'm completing the second treble crochet. After we do that, we're going to work by working in front of these last 2 stitches. We're going to work front post trebles in these 2 stitches. Okay, we come around and complete that one, and then we do the next one as well. Okay, now this braided cable stitch is a 6-stitch multiple, so we're also going to do front post trebles in the very next 2 stitches. So once we finish this braided cable, we should have 6 stitches in this cable. Okay, let's go ahead and stop and check that. We had the first 2 stitches here, 1, 2, and then 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, after that we're going to work double crochets in the next 2 stitches. Now do make sure when you do this that you don't double dip and use a stitch that you've already used. We're going to use the next stitch that has not been used. Okay, that's 1, 2. Okay, now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to work the Celtic weave over the next 12 stitches. Okay, now the Celtic weave is going to look very similar, but do try not to get these confused. Okay, so we're going to skip the next 2 stitches, and we're going to front post treble in the next 2. Working in front of the 2 stitches we just completed, we're going to front post treble in these 2 stitches. Now so far it does look like we're doing another braided cable, but we really aren't. And this is where it changes. Okay, so we're going to be doing this over 12 stitches. We just completed 4 stitches, so we're going to do this 2 more times. We're going to skip the next 2 stitches, 1, 2, and we're going to front post treble in the next 2 stitches. Okay, working in front of these 2 stitches that we just finished. Front post treble in those 2 skip stitches. And there you have 2 sets of 4 stitches, which makes a total of 8 stitches that we've done with the Celtic weave. Now we're going to do this one more time. We're going to do the next 4 stitches just like we did the last 8. We're going to skip the next 2 stitches, and we're going to front post treble in the next 2. All right, now we're going to double crochet in the next 2 stitches. Again, make sure that you have cleared the stitches that you've used for these cabling and that we're not using 1 stitch twice, because that's going to really throw our stitch count if we do that. Okay, now we're going to work another braided cable over the next 6 stitches. I'm going to skip 2, and we're going to front post treble in the next 2 stitches, working in front of those last 2 stitches, front post treble crochet in the 2 skipped stitches. And this is where the braided cable is different. We just front post treble in the next 2 stitches. Okay, let's stop and take a look at what we should have at this point. All right, now we're going to work double crochets in the next 2 stitches, and these are just working in through the top loops like we've been doing. Okay, now we're going to work another braided cable stitch. Skip 2, front post treble in the next 2 stitches, working in front of the last 2 stitches, we're going to front post treble in the 2 skip stitches, and then complete that braided cable by working front post treble in the next 2 stitches. Okay, and we're going to work 2 more double crochets, just working through the tops. These are the areas that will kind of separate the cabling and kind of give it some depth, help it to pop a little bit. Okay, so let's take another review. We have the beginning of a cable, of a braided cable. We have the 12-stitch Celtic Weave section, another braided cable, another braided cable. Okay, now we're going to be working the Celtic Weave stitch over 24 stitches. So that's going to mean 4, since it's a multiple of 4 as we make the crosses, like right back here, these crosses of 4 stitches. We're going to have 6 of those. So 6 times 4 is going to be 24 stitches. Okay, so we're going to skip the next 2 stitches, and we're just going to work that Celtic Weave crisscross by working front post trebles in the next 2 stitches, working in front of these last 2 stitches, front post treble in the 2 stitches that we skipped. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead. I'll do this with you just so I'm very clear. Skip the next 2, front post treble in the next 2 stitches, working in front of the last 2 stitches here, front post treble in those 2 skip stitches, okay, now let's stop and pause. So now we have 8 stitches in this Celtic Weave section. We want to keep going. We're going to skip the next 2 stitches, and we're going to work that 4 stitch cross again by working front post treble in the next 2 stitches, working in front of these 2 stitches, front post treble in the 2 skip stitches, okay, so that brings our count up to 1, 2, 3 groupings of this Celtic Weave, so we need to do 3 more. Skip the next 2, front post treble in the next 2 stitches, and working in front of those 2 stitches, front post treble in the 2 skipped stitches, and let's do that 2 more times. Skip the next 2, front post treble in the next 2, I am working this on the faster side, so if you're an absolute beginner, I apologize to that for that, but I'm just assuming that you are at least a confident beginner or an intermediate crocheter at this stage. Okay, we're going to cross in front of these two. We're going to front post treble in those two skip stitches. Okay, let's stop and pause and see what we've done. So we have 4, 8, 12, 16, 20. We need to do one more set so that we have 24 stitches. Skip the next two, front post treble in the next two stitches, working in front of these last two stitches, front post treble in the two skip stitches. Okay, let's pause and take another review. I know this is a bit painstaking, but this is really, really important. Okay, so from the beginning again, we have the beginnings of a braided cable. We have 3 of these crosses for the Celtic weave. And then we have another braided cable foundation, another braided cable foundation. And now we have the Celtic weave, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sets of 4 stitches. So that's our 24 count, the center motif or the center cabling of this project. Okay, after we do that, we're going to work 2 double crochets, just working through the tops the way you normally would. Now what we do on this other side should mirror what we've already completed here. So now we're going to work another braided cable, skip 2, front post treble in the next 2 stitches, working in front of these 2 stitches. We're going to front post treble in the 2 skipped stitches, and then work front post trebles in the next 2 stitches. We're not skipping anything because we're doing the braid for these last two stitches. Okay, so now we're going to work 2 more double crochets, 1, 2, and we're going to work another braided cable, 1, 2, skip 2 stitches, front post treble in the next 2 stitches, working in front of these 2 stitches, front post treble in those 2 skip stitches, and then front post treble in the next 2 stitches to complete that foundation for that braided cable. Okay, so let's take a look at what we have here now. Okay, so now we need to do 2 more double crochets, working through the tops. Again, make sure that we're not double dipping and reusing stitches that we've already used for post stitches. Okay, now we need to do the 12 stitch Celtic weave, which is going to be 3 crisscrosses of the Celtic weave. So we're going to skip those 2 stitches, the next 2 stitches, front post treble in the next 2 stitches, working in front of these last 2 stitches. We're going to front post treble in the 2 stitches that were skipped. And we're going to skip the next 2 stitches because we are doing the Celtic weave. Front post treble in the next 2 stitches. Working in front of the last 2. Now you're probably tiring of hearing this already, but I'm trying to be as clear as possible. And we're front post trebling in front, and working it in those 2 stitches that were skipped. So let's pause a minute. So we have 2 crisscrosses of the Celtic weave, or 8 stitches, so we need to do 4 more, which is 1 more crisscross. Skip the next 2 stitches, front post treble in the next 2 stitches, working in front of these last 2 stitches. Go ahead and front post treble and the 2 skipped stitches. Okay, let's take another pause. Okay, so now we have our 12 stitches. Okay, now it's time to work the 2 double crochets. Okay, now let's go ahead and skip the next 2. Let's see, what are we? Let's take a pause and look at what we've gotten so far. Okay, so we have the braid, 12 stitches of the Celtic Weave, another braid, the 24 stitches of the Celtic Weave, followed by 2 more braids, and then we have the 12 stitches of the Celtic Weave. Okay, now we come to the last braid. We skip 2 stitches, front post treble, and the next 2, working in front of these 2 stitches we just completed, front post treble in those 2 skipped stitches, and then front post treble in the next 2 stitches. And we're going to double crochet in that last stitch, and then double crochet. I'm going to double crochet in the top of that single crochet. Let's see, I'm sorry, top of that chain, if you can see right there. And we have finished the row. So let's go ahead and chain 3. And now we're ready to begin, or actually that was the beginning. By chaining 3, we begin row number 3. And this is the other row that you're going to be repeating again and again. Skip the first double crochet in the next double crochet. Now we're going to be working with the back side facing, but we're going to be working the same stitches straight across, and actually this row should be easier if you've established it correctly. Okay, we're going to skip the next 2 stitches. We are working on the braid with the back side facing. We're going to work 2 back post treble crochets. And by working these, we just grab that stitch just like so. Now working in front of these 2 stitches as seen from the front side, we are going to work, let me show you, a back post double crochet around these 2 stitches. If you want to flip it up, you can see and actually feel these 2 stitches. So we're just doing back post treble crochet. It's the same as a front post, except you're coming in from the back door instead of going in the front door, and wrapping it around the stitch. Okay, and then we just do the very next 2, so you don't have any here to skip, but for the braid we just do the very next 2. And after I do a few rows, you'll see how this does produce a braid, and then we'll do the next one as well. I'm going to turn this around just to show you what we've done. Okay, so this is, again, we're still at the foundation level, but working on that braid. Okay, after that, we're actually in between each different motif that you do as you work along. You have the 2 double crochet stitches, so you don't want to forget those, working in through the tops like you normally would. Okay, now we're working the back side facing of the Celtic Weave. Now this has a slightly different procedure. Okay, you notice like when we worked this with the front side facing, we skipped 2 stitches. Well, we're not going to do that when we have the back side facing. We're going to work the very next 2 stitches by working a back post double crochet. Okay, so we don't skip the first 2 stitches. Now after we have done those 2 stitches, we're going to skip the next 2, which are these 2 stitches leaning this way, and we're going to front post around the next 2 stitches. If we flip this up, we can see that they are right there. This is a bit more of an advanced, more of an intermediate stitch, but not exactly for
true beginners. Not to say that a beginner couldn't learn this quickly, you can, but it's always good to have the ability to, establish stitches evenly and consistently before you begin with this. Now, working in front of these 2 stitches, we're going to come around and we're going to back post double crochet around these 2. We're going to bring our hook around, make sure that they are going to be falling in front of those last 2 stitches as seen from the front. I know I'm using a lot of language, but I'll show you what I mean by this. Okay. What I mean by this is when the front side is facing, these stitches that we just worked will have fallen in front of these other 2 stitches. Okay. Now I'm going to skip the next 2 stitches, and we're going to do this again. Back post in the next 2 stitches, back post treble crochet. Now working in front of these, as seen from the front side, we're going to work 2 back post double crochets in these 2 stitches that we skipped. Let's get that. There we go. And then let's get the other one. And then just complete that back post treble. Okay, now that leaves us 2 more stitches here. So we don't skip any stitches, but we go ahead and do the last 2 of this Celtic Weave section by working a back post treble crochet. And I'm going to flip this around and show you why we did it this way. Okay, the first 2 stitches were here, and what happens is these stitches are going to turn and then they're going to actually come back this way, kind of like a Celtic knot. Okay, and the same for this other side, which were the last 2 that we worked before skipping, and then this is going to actually curve around and go being woven back into what we're working on in that section. Okay, now we work 2 double crochets. Okay, now we're back to working with the braided cables. We're going to have 2 of those separated by the 2 double crochets. Skip 2, back post double crochet in the next 2 stitches. Working in front of these 2 stitches, we're going to back post double crochet in those 2 skipped stitches. And then back post double crochet in the next 2 stitches. Okay, and double crochet and a double crochet, working in through the top loops. And we're going to do that again. We're going to do another, skip the 2. This is working on a braided cable. Do back post treble. Almost all the stitches are back post treble or front post treble, except for those double crochets that divide the motifs. Okay, then we're going to work in front of these stitches. We're going to work the 2 stitches that we skipped. And then the next 2. By not skipping any, just do the next 2 for that braid. And then the 2 double crochets. All right, now we're back to working. This is the center Celtic Weave section. We're going to have there are the 6 crosses of 4 stitches that we worked with the front side facing. Okay, for the Celtic Weave, again, you don't skip these first 2, but instead we will go ahead and work 2 back post treble crochets. Now we begin skipping 2. We skip the next 2, which are right here, and then we're going to back post treble in the next 2 stitches. Working in front of these two, we're going to back post treble the next two stitches. And skip the next two, back post treble the next two stitches. Working in front of these two, we're going to back post treble the next two stitches. Skip the next two, back post treble the next two stitches. Working in front of these two, back post treble in the next two stitches. And skip the next two, back post treble in the next two. This is very redundant. So once you understand these two major stitches, the Celtic Weave and the Braided Cable, this should be a breeze. And believe me, by the time you do 53 rows of this, you're going to be an expert in these two stitches. Okay, let's go ahead and skip these two. Back post treble in the next two stitches. I'm almost done with this major section here. And then working in front of these two, back post double crochet in the next two stitches. Okay, now this is the point. It's real important. We don't skip anymore at this point, but we work the last two stitches of this section with just back post treble crochets. I'm going to go ahead and turn and show you what this section should look like now. See how this is going to curve around, and this one also is going to curve around and go the other direction. And let's keep going and finish out this row. We're almost there. Okay, double crochets in the next two stitches. Just work through the tops. Now we have the braided cable. Skip these two. Back post treble in the next two stitches. Working in front of these two stitches. Back post treble in the next two stitches. And then don't skip any and just go ahead and do the next two. So this is stitches number 5 and 6 in the braided cable. Just two back post trebles and double crochet in the next two stitches. Now we have another braided cable. Go ahead and skip the next two. Back post treble in the next two stitches. Working in front of these as seen from the front side. Back post treble in those two skipped stitches. Now don't skip any here, just go ahead and back post treble in the next two stitches for that braided cable. And double crochet in the next two stitches. Now we have the back side of the next Celtic Weave section. So for that Celtic Weave, we're just going to go ahead and back post double the next two stitches. We don't skip any as we begin this with the back side. Now we skip two and back post double crochet in the next two stitches. Working in front of these two stitches, go ahead and back post in the two skipped stitches. I also should add that when you're working on these, use the tall man and the thumbkin finger and find these 2 stitches. They're easier to feel than they really are to see as you're working with the woven stitches the way they are. Okay, skip the next 2, back post treble in the next 2 stitches, working in front of these 2 stitches, back post treble in the next 2, and the last 2 stitches, we're not going to skip any, but go ahead and back post treble. These are the last 2 that are going to be curving around as you work the next round, or rather the next row. Okay, we're almost to the end here of this 3rd row. Double crochet the next 2 stitches. Now we're going to skip these 2 stitches, and we're going to back post treble in the next 2 stitches. This is the braided cable. Working in front of these as seen from the front, we're going to back post treble, coming around the back in these 2 stitches. And then don't skip any here, just back post treble in the last 2 of those treble stitches across the row. And it brings us down to the last 2 stitches. We're going to work 2 double crochets, 1 in that last double crochet, and then 1 in the top of the turning chain. Okay, so we have finished that 3rd row. Now we're going to turn. Let's take a look at what we have here. Okay, so we have, again, just to review, the beginnings of a braided cable. Then we have the Celtic weave, braided cable, large Celtic weave section, which is the center, another braided cable, a smaller Celtic weave section, and then another braided cable. Okay, so I have shown you, for the most part, all that you need to know with these last 2 rows, row 2 and row 3, what you're going to be doing for the next many rows up into row 53. So from row 4 to row 53, we're going to just repeat rows 2 and 3 like I've already shown you. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and complete a couple more of these rows, and then I'll show you what I have. Okay, after 2 more repeats of rows 2 and 3, this is what you should have. You should be able to clearly see the Celtic weave sections and the braided cables. Okay, so all you need to do from this point on is to repeat rows 2 and 3 until you have approximately 53 rows. Now, if you want this to be longer, feel free to add additional rows, but I'm going to go ahead and do this until I have a total of 53 rows. And it's easy to count the rows by just counting the ends here, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It should be fairly easy to count. I just wanted to show you some more of my progress as I work on this baby blanket. This will end video number 1. In video number 2, we will complete working this, including the perimeter round and the finishing edging. Okay, I'll see you in video number 2. God bless. Bye-bye.